One good break can change everything. I expect everyone that has lived a while can look back and can find a place where someone has given them a break that changed the direction of their life. Come on with me and ride with me on my Kawasaki while I talk about the break I got. In May 1982, I had just got my commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force and went into my initial qualification training, IQT, as a nuclear missile launch officer at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. My wife was 5 months pregnant, and she had resigned her job as a teacher and made arrangements to have our household goods shipped to Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, for my first duty assignment after completing initial qualification training, IQT, at Vandenberg. After I pulled through the gates of Vandenberg Air Force Base, I went to the visiting officers' quarter, where I will be staying for the next 14 weeks. I spotted a guy sitting on the cul-de-sac curb when I was pulling up to my VOQ, visiting officers' quarters. He had a white t-shirt on with a pack of cigarettes rolled up in his white shirt sleeve. He had 3 cans of beer hanging from one of his hands. He had a beer in the other hand and a cigarette dangling from his lips. I didn't know it then, but he was destined to be my crew partner all through initial qualification training. At the very beginning of the 560 hours of training we would get, the instructors made it very clear that failure to meet the requirements would mean, for an all-new second lieutenant like myself, would be a discharge from the Air Force and unemployment, which meant I had no house, no money, no employment, and a baby on the way. My new crew partner, let's call him Al, was a senior captain from the administration field, so failure to him meant he would just return to his previous job assignment. Once we were in training, the instructors tested us frequently. They paired us with another student based on that testing, the strongest with the weakest. The material came easy for me, but came hard for old Al, so we ended up being crew together. Once the initial classroom training was done, we then went into the simulators, the MPTs, Missile Procedure Trainers, with another instructor. Usually it was 2 hours with a weapon systems training, then later on we do 2 more hours of emergency war order training. As a senior captain, Al was made the commander, and as a brand new second lieutenant, I was his deputy during the simulator training. This method of training had the instructor up in the MPT behind us, behind some glass. Everything had to be done by the checklist. Read a step, do a step, and get a banana. The checklists were in a big binder, very similar to I'm going to show you a picture. Every task from routine maintenance and inspections to emergency procedures were in this checklist. The commander's job, Al's job, was to find and read the checklist, and my job as a deputy was to concur that he got the right checklist and follow the checklist actions in most cases. The curriculum was set up to accomplish all the tasks during each missile procedure training ride. Each task had a time requirement to be accomplished. Then it could be anywhere from 20 minutes to 30 seconds. Failure to accomplish those tasks in the time required would result in either a minor, a major, or a critical error. MPTs, the trainers' rides, were built on the previous task that had to be done correctly before you moved on. So you had to get everything done, then you could move on to the next step. Al, the commander, had difficult reading under pressure. In fact, he only read as fast as he moved his finger and had difficulty finding the appropriate checklist. He was reading so slow, we were busting the time allowed to do the task, and we were not completing all the tasks for each MPT ride. The instructor would not allow me to take any actions until Al read them out loud. Because we were getting behind the other crews, we started to have to come in on weekends, and later we even had to take 2 MPT rides during the day to try to catch up. We just got further and further behind. I tried to work with Al to get him to move faster, and we practiced some outside the classroom. But he just would shrug his shoulders at me and like, I'm doing the best I can. Finally got to the point that the school put us on what they call controlled student status, which meant unless we caught up, Al would be sent back to his last job, and I'd be kicked out of the Air Force. I was starting to feel the pressure, really feel it. So during that meeting when they put us on controlled student status, we had Al and I together, our instructor, and the chief of training. So I decided I was going to have to speak up. This is the first time I'd really mentioned it to the instructor. So I said, assuming you put us together because you felt I was strong and Al was weak, and they nodded affirmatively that that's why they put us together. I told him as long as Al was leading as a commander, we'd never catch up. Al didn't say anything. I told him, said, make me the commander and Al the deputy. You could see the chief of training's eyes kind of bugged out at that, because here was a senior captain would be taking being a deputy to a brand new second lieutenant. He looked over to the instructor, and the instructor kind of nodded his head in agreement that that would be better. So that's what we started. We started catching up in the weapon system task, but they were just starting our emergency warrior training, and it was something different, a little bit different in the simulator. So we were still on thin ice, and about ready to get kicked out. The reason we were about ready to get kicked out, we were getting the task done, but we were still missing the required timing on the critical task. The problem was I was reading fast enough, but I was moving so slow that and they wouldn't let me do any of the steps for the most part, so he had to do all the steps. And Al was just so slow in what he's supposed to do. My frustrations with Al were really high. It's like swimming with a boat anchor around your neck. I knew we were going to eventually fail even if we continued. It was a combination of him not trying hard, in my view, or not having the skills to do tasks under pressure. We had failed to make the designated launch times, which was critical error in a few MPT rides. The instructor said, hey, you guys can't miss any more of these. So our next ride, the script that they gave us a little wrinkle in how to put in the enable code. It's a little bit different. Usually a message would be the first letter on each of the thumb wheel drives that Al, the deputy, would have to dial in. It would be like, it would be a letter accompanied by a number, like Oscar 6, Papa 7. Usually they were giving us the first one in the thing. They would give us Oscar, or they give us Papa. But this time they gave us 6 and 7, etc. So as a commander, I read the enable code back to Al. I told him to, it gave him 6 and 7, etc., and for him to dial that in. During the part of the training ride, we're seated in lockdown, so we can't get up and move. We got seat belts on, so I cannot get up to help him. So Al said, there is no 6, there is no 7. Meantime, we're counting down because we've run so slow anyway. We're coming up to our key turn time. We only get a few, maybe 20 seconds left to dial in enable code and turn keys. I told Al, I looked at him, I said, yes, Al, it's right there. It's right next to that O, and it's right next to the P. He said, no, it wasn't. Meantime, I was watching the clock slowly going down to the key turn time. In frustration, I knew I couldn't get up, and he had basically quit trying to look. So I told Al, if we missed the key turn, I was going to come back there and choke him. Well, we missed a key turn, and I figured that was it for us. We'd already had all the warnings we could get. They were more than fair with us, and I thought, well, I'm gone. So I undid my seatbelt and went back to where Al was in. Had just undone his seatbelt and was leaning over the panel where I showed him where the 6 and the 7 was there. And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. Shrugging his shoulders like, what a big deal. It's nothing. It's just another thing we missed. It kind of set a fire in me. If I was going to get kicked out, I was going to keep my promise of what I said I was going to do. So I pinned him up against the wall, the amputee wall, right underneath the glass where the instructor was sitting behind, and placed both hands around his neck and shook him. The instructor came running down the steps, came bouncing into the MPT trainer and had me disengage. Here I was, the second lieutenant, choking the captain. He took us down to the chief instructor. The instructor went inside and he talked to the chief instructor for a few minutes while we waited outside. As a prior enlisted man in the service, I knew I was in for a huge problem. They called Al and I into the office. You could still see the little red marks where my fingers were on his throat. I was expecting a court-martial, or at the very least a discharge. What I got was, and Al got, was a big surprise, I think, to both of us. The chief instructor proposed that Al and I both be recruited with new crew partners and continue training. I think the implication for Al was he could press charges as he wanted to, and there's nothing they could do to stop him. But he'd be washed out of training, and he'd have to go back to his previous job assignment. Or we could both get a fresh start. Of course, it was a good deal for me, and I think it was a pretty good deal, a break for Al. So I was immediately taken off control student status and went on to a successful missile career. Here's a picture of me at the IQT. I'm in the back row with the arrow there, and Al's in there too, but you'll have to find him. Al stayed on the control student status and went on, and he did go ahead to graduate, and we went to the same base. He struggled there at the new base with the certification and had such a disastrous first alert they sent him back to his own career field anyway. Al, the instructor, and the chief instructor gave me a break. That break kind of changed my life. I'm sure glad I didn't get that discharge and get kicked out of the Air Force. Thanks again, Al. I was very lucky to get a break from 3 other officers at the beginning of my career. It only seems right that my Air Force career was effectively ended when I gave another officer the break he needed. But that's another story. Has anybody ever given you such a good break? It's changed your life? Let me know in the comments.